Welcome back. We're going to start off this third episode covering the tournament with the 9 seed. It's the Ohio State Buckeyes making their first trip to the NCAA tournament in 5 years. And I'm joined by Big Ten Network analyst Audrey Flaugh, who's covered the Buckeyes on and off over the last couple decades. Audrey, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
This has to be exciting for the Columbus area, for the team, and especially for an alum, the new head coach, Jen Flynn Oldenburg, right?
Well, absolutely. We're all behind Jen Flynn Oldenburg. She is a very likable person. She's a very smart coach. She's been able to assemble a great staff. And so all of us, not just the alumni, but the community in general here in Columbus, there's a real buzz about this team, and we can't wait to see how they do in the tournament.
So as, a Big Ten person in myself, I've been following Ohio State all season long, but it really took the nation a while to start to realize that the Buckeyes were for real. Because you take a look at this season, Audrey, to get a 9 seed is a huge accomplishment. It started with a couple 5-set wins over Maryland, and then finally getting that big win over Penn State, a team that Ohio State has seemed to do pretty well against in the past few years. Walk me through some of the strengths from this Ohio State team.
Well, I think their personnel is incredible. They are very young, but you've got a great setter in Mac Pedraza, 4-time Big Ten setter of the week. You've got Emily Londot, who's the right side, who is just a huge talent from Columbus, Ohio. Both Mac and Emily played at Mintonette Volleyball Club. So their talent is second to none. And it's exciting for them because they played at my club, Mintonette. And so it's great to see them do big things. So you win with people, and Jen really inherited a great roster of talented and young players. So when they took on Penn State and they beat them, that was certainly exciting for everybody. The city again was all buzzing about the Buckeye volleyball team. So it was wonderful to see.
Undefeated for half of the season, and then a heartbreaking reverse sweep. The same thing that Ohio State did to Penn State. Nebraska stung them in the Devaney Center. But I'll tell you what, major props to Oldenburg, to that entire team, because the next night you have to play Nebraska again, come from behind, beat them in 5 sets. Ohio State's going to take on the winner of Missouri and South Dakota. It'll be a noon Eastern time first serve on Thursday, the 15th. And when you look at this Ohio State team, a lot of youth, Audrey. The 2 players that really stood out to me, Riley Rader in the middle, a freshman, Emily Londot on the right side, a freshman. What is the sense that you're getting of a veteran leadership on this crew?
Well, there isn't one. There's no veteran leadership. I mean, the elephant in the room is not one player on the court right now has ever had NCAA tournament experience. The coaching staff has. There's one player that transferred from Dayton that has been in the NCAA tournament. But they rely on their youth, which is great. Like we said, Emily is a huge force on the right side. You've got a great middle that's hitting high percentage. Kylie Murr is doing a great job as the libero. So they're young, but they're talented. They're insanely talented. And this young group has had experience at the highest level of club. Some of them have played internationally. So this is not a young, naive team. This is a very young, talented, hungry Buckeye team.
So Coach Oldenburg actually named a few hours ago the Big Ten Coach of the Year. She went to 4 NCAA tournaments as a member of the Buckeyes in the early 90s, the first player in conference history to be named an all-conference player at 2 different positions, setter and outside, and Londot named Freshman of the Year. The one thing, though, that I think may be a weakness, and I'd love for you to talk to me about this, is that second left side position for the Buckeyes. They use Gabby Gonzalez. She's fantastic in the back row numerous times. She picks up 12, 14, 13 digs in the first few sets, but we've seen them go to Janasia Moore a few times, the big, athletic, huge right arm of Moore. When you have 2 second left sides, it's almost like you don't have any second left sides, right?
Well, I mean, it's a nice problem to have 2 that are very talented. The balance of the offense, though, that Mac Pedraza sets really helps with that second left side position. Both of them are very capable. Both are very different types of players. But you've got Buklik, who's another left side, and she is really tall. She hits a flat ball. So I feel like their offense is really balanced. I'm not too concerned about that L2 position at all. I think there's great balance across the board.
Very excited to see these Buckeyes in action. First time in the NCAA tournament since making the Sweet 16 back in 2016, and a heartbreaking 5-set loss for Buckeye Nation as well. So a little bit of revenge, plus a team on the other side of this sub-region that Buckeyes fans in every sport surely want to beat in the Florida Gators. Thank you so much for joining me, Audrey.
It was my pleasure. Go Bucks.
No doubt. We're going to move on to the 10 seed next. We'll be right back. From Columbus out to Eugene, it's time to talk about the 10 seed. It's the Oregon Ducks out of the Pac-12. They got a lot of love from the committee. Best Pac-12 team, shy of just Washington. And so I'm joined now by the voice of Oregon, Sean MacPherson. Sean, how's everything doing today with you?
It's good. It's good. I was quite surprised by Oregon's ranking yesterday, Daniel. I have to tell you, Oregon was kind of sitting around that 16 at best. They started the season unranked, but they never surpassed 16 all season long. And the fact that Oregon got the 10 seed, I thought was quite generous yesterday, but I think they earned it. They had a great year, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with you.
See, what's funny about that is in my bracket breakdown with Ed Strong, who runs the Volleyball Scores Twitter account, he was surprised thinking that Oregon was actually underseeded and Purdue was overseeded. So that kind of equals each other out. I mean, I'm a little biased, you're a little biased, and we kind of lean in other directions. I think Purdue deserves the 7 spot, and I'm excited to see what Oregon has to offer. Tell me about this team, because it's always tough. We've got 2 teams here in this sub-regional with Purdue and Oregon that finished their season in a pretty rough note, right? Purdue loses to Illinois in 5, Oregon loses to Arizona State in 5. But what was your overall consensus grade of Oregon's 2021 year under head coach Matt Ulmer?
Oregon had a great season. I think when you think about what kind of season they had last year, they really struggled last season. 9-20, they go 5-15 in the Pac-12. It didn't take them very long to surpass that this season. And they lost 2 historic players from their program last season. Ronica Stone and Willow Johnson departed. But this season, they're led by Brooke Nuneviller, who I think's, if not the best, one of the best players in program history. She is incredible. I mean, Matt Ulmer, the head coach, called her the best player in the country. And I think that definitely has some merit. I think she's certainly up there. I'm excited to see where she places and, some national recognition later this year. But, this Oregon team's really good. I think the backbone of it is obviously Nuneviller, who I just touched on. She's really good offensively and defensively. She's the only player in the Pac-12 in top 10 in kills per set and digs per set. She had 35 kills against Washington, who's the number 6 seed. And then it's also just has a great defense, led by Nuneviller. But this Oregon team is top 4 in digs per set, blocks per set, opponents hitting percentage. They lead the Pac-12 in digs per set. So it's a really good defensive team. The offense has gotten better throughout the season. In addition to Nuneviller, Gloria Mutiri is a great player for them. Taylor Borup, Morgan Lewis. They have some great other outside hitters and opposites. So all around, this is a great Oregon team, and I'm really looking forward to watching their postseason run.
When you have a star, right, and you just, you can kind of build a postseason run around a player like Brooke Nuneviller, it's easy to kind of look at Oregon and say, okay, any given day, they can go on a run. But let me ask you, on the flip side of things, you take a look at their schedule, and there was not one dominant weekend, right? You didn't see one weekend where Oregon swept through Washington, right? They split with Washington. They split with UCLA, and then they split with Washington State. So what is 1 or 2 maybe chinks in the armor, weaknesses for this Oregon team?
Sure. Yeah, I think they've been rather consistent throughout the season. They did split with all those top teams. And I think those top teams, there was 5 really good teams in the Pac-12 this year. UCLA didn't end up getting a bye, but they were a really good team as well.
I think they got that second, right? 16 BYU, 17 UCLA almost.
They were really close, but I think all those teams kind of beat each other up. Oregon has had some really bad performances this year. You're right. I think that, that Washington weekend was crazy. I had the pleasure of broadcasting that, and Washington was a top 10 team at the time. And, Oregon, that first Friday they played them, absolutely just got it handed to them. I mean, Washington straight destroyed them. I think it was like 25-15, or maybe even worse in that third set. And it was a sweep by the Huskies. But then Oregon comes back, and I'll tell you what, they were so close to getting swept in that second match against Washington, the one that Nunaviller had 35 kills. They prevail in set number 3, and then they handled sets 4 and 5 rather easily because of how good Brooke Nunaviller was. But I think it's consistency. You're right. I mean, they just lost to Arizona State the first time they played them in Tempe, and then they come back and destroy Arizona State to cap off the regular season. Same thing happened against UCLA. Same thing didn't really happen against Washington State. They were pretty even with the Cougars both times they played. But I think Oregon, going into this tournament, they have to hope that they get the best out of them every single time, because their variance has been pretty high. But I think the highest degree of their variance has been a top 10 caliber squad for sure.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we didn't get to see that highly anticipated Utah match that weekend in late February. So that's something that's there's a lot of those what ifs here in 2021. But let me ask you now, Sean, when you look at Oregon and you think, the first thing that pops into my mind is that incredible upset over Minnesota to get to the Elite Eight, when Minnesota looked like they were going to go to the Final Four in their hometown. Samantha Seliger-Swenson, everything surrounding it. Oregon beat a good Baylor team in 2018, made it to the Elite Eight. But then 2019, under 500, what happened?
Man, it was a weird season. So they were led by Ronica Stone and Willow Johnson. Willow Johnson hurt herself on the East Coast road trip they went on. She hurt her ankle. I forget who they were playing. They were playing Pittsburgh, actually, a really good team at the time. And Willow Johnson was hurt. She was sidelined for a little while. And they had Taylor Borup out this year, one of the leaders on this year's team. Borup was out last year. They had a lot of young players. I think they had like 10 freshmen on their team last season. And, a lot of those players are playing really, really well this year. But I think it just took them a little while to come into their own. And so it was really, the team last year was Nunaviller in her first year as an outside hitter. She was a libero her freshman year. It was Johnson, who was kind of hobbled up throughout the season. It was Ronica Stone, who, was a really good player. They moved her between middle blocker and outside hitter. And other than that, it was a bunch of freshmen. And, even maybe their best freshman in that class, Georgia Murphy, who's their libero now, she, Matt Ulmer told me that she had a hurt shoulder throughout that entire season. So it was just a really messy year, and they could never really stay on the court together. And, they had, they talk about inconsistent. That team was capable of beating anyone and losing to anyone. And it showed throughout the season last year. So, that Oregon team was a really strange season. They were so much more talented than what they provided last year. And, I'm happy that they're showing that talent this year.
And what's funny is Purdue on the other side of this sub-region maybe benefited from all of the time off because of the freshmen were able to learn. That's something that the coach is often talking about. It sounds like Oregon, another team that kind of benefited from maybe not having their normal fall season right after such a letdown of a 2019 campaign. So it'll be interesting to keep tabs on the Ducks. I'm excited to listen to your broadcast here coming up. It's going to be an early one, right? You got to get your coffee, a 9 a.m. Pacific time start for Oregon on Thursday, April 15th. They'll take on the winner of Army and Notre Dame. Clear favorites, I'm assuming, for the Fighting Irish there. Army's only played 8 matches, but enjoy your prep, and thank you so much for joining me, Sean.
Appreciate it, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We're going to move on up and head to the 11 seed next. Down to Louisville for the 11 seed, and I'm joined now by the analyst for the Louisville Cardinals volleyball team on ESPN and ACC Network Plus. She's Lauren Rust. Thank you so much for joining me on this fantastic morning.
You are welcome, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm trying to reach out and connect with all 48 team fan bases, make sure that everyone gets their voices heard, and so that the casual fans who are going to be tuning in for all of these matches on Wednesday and Thursday of this next week, make sure that they know who some of the star players are. And for Louisville, they've got a few of them. The Cardinals, the 11 seed, Danny Busboom Kelly's team, making it to the Elite Eight for the first time in program history last year. So I had to imagine coming into this season, Lauren, the expectations were pretty high, right?
Yes, without really losing anyone, they did lose Melanie McHenry, who was their star senior, but they lost her in the middle of last season. So really it's the same squad that was back and adding in some very, very talented freshmen. So the expectations were pretty high going into the season.
Yeah, I'm sure your average volleyball fan might remember that fantastic run, the 5-set win over Western Kentucky, the 5-set win over Texas, kind of playing for Melanie and eventually running into the buzzsaw that was Minnesota. So walk me through some of the players that we might want to watch for in this upcoming weekend, or week, I should say. Louisville's going to take on the winner of San Diego and Texas A&M Corpus Christi. It's a noon Eastern time match on Thursday. Who can we look for?
Wow. I mean, I can think, Daniel, of a number of athletes to look for, but I think kind of some of the ones that may stand out would be those that had grabbed a number of the ACC awards at the end of the season. So the first one that I would probably go to is Amaya Tillman. She was named the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. She was second team All-ACC. And actually, she led the ACC and ranks third in the NCAA in blocks per set with 1.65. So I mean, she's kind of spearheads this defense at the net, and she is a phenomenal blocker. I think the second athlete that I would probably go to would be Anna DeBeer, freshman, phenomenal athlete, jumps out of the gym. And she was named to the All-ACC freshman team. She was named to the All-ACC Freshman of the Year and the All-ACC first team. So that's really hard to do as a freshman. She ranks 10th in the ACC in kills per set. So someone also to be on the lookout for. Aiko Jones, always a solid player. This is her second time on the first team All-ACC, and someone that has that infectious personality that you want to be on the court at all times. And then I think the last athlete, and would probably want to be one of my X factors, is Tori Dilfer. She's probably one of the best setters in the country. She was named to the All-ACC Setter of the Year, first team All-ACC. But I think what she brings to the table is that she runs such a balanced offense. I think the second piece too is that she can play defense. A lot of setters around the country, that's not their norm, is not to play defense. It's more on the offensive side of the ball. But most teams, if they're out of system, they'll go to that right back position, and she has no trouble whatsoever handling that first ball. And then I think too, the second X factor would be Anna Stevenson, where she did receive first team All-ACC honors. I think, she doesn't really get the credit nationally that she deserves. When I had a conversation with Coach Busboom Kelly about Anna, she had mentioned that she is insanely physical, and she's one of the easiest players to coach. She's a great leader on and off the court and a great teammate too. And so I would think that Tori and Anna probably would be my X factors for their run through this tournament.
Yeah, talking about depth, I mean, there are so many players that on any given day could stand out for the Cardinals. A 10-match winning streak. It was an up and down fall semester, as it was for so many teams, right? Starting with a loss to Notre Dame, bouncing back with a few wins, beating a Syracuse team that at the time was ranked in the top 10, and then splitting with Pittsburgh. The spring, though, has been dominant. Walk me through what the differences between last year's team might be to this year's team.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Daniel, and the fact that it's depth. I mean, this team has probably the most depth offensively and defensively that they've had in years. Speaking of offense, I mean, they have probably a good 6, 7, maybe even 8 attackers that could go off on any one evening. And that makes them very, very difficult to not only scout, but to even key in on any of their athletes, because you really never know who's going to come out and be swinging away. So I think that's really probably the biggest difference between last year's squad and this year's squad is depth.
And the last question here for you, Lauren. What is the game script, right? What kind of identity does Louisville have? What do they need to do to try to make another run to the regionals?
Well, blocking obviously is key, but I think serving. When I talked to Coach Meskey, he had mentioned that, Louisville has one of the best serving corps in the country, but they have to make sure that they're efficient, they're following the game plan, and they're being fundamentally sound. So I think that is really going to be the key in returning to regionals. But as you know, and as everyone saw in the men's and women's NCAA basketball tournaments, seeds once the first whistle was blown, all seeds, all rankings, they go out the window. And so I think it comes down to just playing fundamental volleyball and executing the game plan that the coaches set forth.
Great point. Fantastic insight. Thank you so much, Lauren.
You're welcome, Daniel.
She's the analyst on TV for Louisville Volleyball, Lauren Rust. We're going to move on down to Baylor and talk to Brice Cherry next about the 12-seeded Bears. We go from Louisville to the 12 seed down to Texas. It's Baylor, from a 1 seed to a 12 seed. And I'm now joined by the sports editor of the Waco Tribune-Herald, Brice Cherry. And Brice, talk to me about this, because I have not, been able to see as much Baylor as I want to. And I think I probably speak with the rest of college volleyball nation. Is there one or two things that have really been a big difference between last season and this season?
I think maybe the quality of the blocking has been not quite at the level it was in 2019 when Baylor made its very first Final Four appearance. They were a number 1 seed, number 1 overall seed, and that was a really historic year for Baylor, obviously. And Shelley Stafford was kind of the horse there in the middle. And they miss her. She's playing professional volleyball in Poland now. I think that's part of it, but I also think, not to make excuses for Baylor or anything like that, but it's been such a disjointed season. The Big 12 was one of the very few conferences that, actually had a fall volleyball schedule with its conference schedule back then. And Baylor the previous year split with Texas and shared that Big 12 title for the first time. This past season, Texas, had its number. There were some tough matches, but Texas won them both. And so they just haven't been quite at that same level. Then you have a break and you come back and you play some spring matches. And so that cohesion, I think, is something they're still kind of searching for. Will they find it in time to make a run in the tournament? I think that's the big question. I mean, they did talk yesterday in their media availability that, they're motivated by being a 12 seed. They think they're better than that. So we'll see.
Yeah, I happen to think that they are one of the better 12 seeds in recent history. And, that loaded foursome of Nebraska, Penn State, Baylor, and Texas is going to be a whale to see who can get out of that. Then you throw in Rice and Texas State, who has familiarity with, of course, Texas and Baylor. Taking a look at this schedule, though, for Baylor, you mentioned the 2 losses in the fall to Texas, both in 5 sets, and then another 2 losses in the spring to Texas, 1 in 4 sets, and then 1 in 5 sets. Both in 4 sets here in the spring. You have to, how do you not get one of those, right? It's almost those things where it's like, everything has to go Texas's way. And it felt like it did, especially in this most recent match, one that I was able to watch a lot of. Incredible points. I think the first set went 30-28 or the second set. And so taking a look at Baylor, who is someone that you might expect that, not everyone is paying attention to. We all know Yassiana Presley and Marique Vandermark had a fantastic 2019 run, but is Lauren Harrison, the UNC transfer, someone to keep an eye on?
Lauren has definitely kind of given them another hitting option. Like you said, everyone knows about Yassi, and she was National Player of the Year in 2019, and is just phenomenal to watch every time you watch her. I mean, she looks like she's going to jump over the net. And she's literally that bouncy as a personality too. She's just fun.
You don't have to remind me. I was courtside for that Sweet 16 demolition.
Yeah. She's something else. But Lauren Harrison has given them another option, another dimension, and has probably had maybe some more efficient games of late than Yassi has. So that's good to have that other option besides Yassi and then Marika on the other side. Now, Marika is actually dealing with a little bit of an injury, apparently day to day. So we'll see how that plays out. That could be a factor for Baylor, but they do get that first round bye. So, maybe she's able to rest up and still play, because she's a player they need. And then, another player you mentioned who might get overlooked, she's actually a former All-American, but Hannah Sedgwick, their setter, she's so dangerous with her dumps. I mean, she, when you'll look up and she'll have like 5 kills and 7 swings or something like that. And she's just really sneaky in that regard. And Baylor's excited because Yasi and Hannah are have both already announced that they're coming back for the fall for, what is that, 6 years, 5 years? I guess it'll be 5 years, but it feels like they've been here forever now.
And I'm sure that their opponents will feel that same way. I know, Purdue will have to see a lot of this Big Ten talent once again. But taking a look at who Baylor may play, briefly talking about this, the winner of UMBC and Pepperdine. And I don't want to disregard the Retrievers in any way, but let's focus on Pepperdine. They're clearly the favorites. They were a ranked team ending the season, but a team with a little bit of familiarity, right? For Baylor, they faced them just a few weeks ago in a 5-set thriller that Pepperdine came back to win the 4th after a lopsided 3rd set, just to see the Bears dominate the 5th set 15-7. How much do you think that might factor into the confidence level of the Baylor Bears?
I think it does factor in. I mean, it gives them, like you said, some familiarity there with Pepperdine, and the fact that they did just see them recently. That can't hurt. That said, they know they're good. I mean, they know that they did stretch them to 5 sets. And one thing in talking with Ryan McGuire yesterday after the bracket was announced, I mean, he mentioned that, yeah, sure, it's nice to have a first round bye, but you might have like one less practice than those other teams. And, so he was a little concerned about rust, the fact that, whoever they play, be it Pepperdine or UMBC, would have that game under their belt. And so, he basically said anybody you play in the second round of the NCAA tournament, especially a 48-team NCAA tournament, is going to be good. And so, I don't think Pepperdine's going to be intimidated by Baylor at any stretch. That probably gives them some confidence as well. Yep. So I think it's a good second round matchup, and, Baylor should be favored, but it should be a fun one.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of teams that could either go to the Elite Eight or fall in their first match. And I think Coach McGuire and Yassiana Presley could fall into that. A noon Eastern time start could be a 9 a.m. start local time for Pepperdine. So that's another, maybe minor advantage if Baylor fans want to look here or there. But, I really appreciate it, Brice. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks a bunch.
Absolutely. He's Brice Cherry, sports editor of the Waco Tribune-Herald.